My name is Camille Easton. I'm 33 years old, and for the past 8 years, my family has quietly tolerated what they call that little shop I run in Boston's North End. The kind of place they describe with amused smiles and subtle eye rolls during dinner parties. They've always praised my sister Vanessa for her high-flying legal career, her Ivy League credentials, her dermatologist husband, and their 2 honor roll children. Meanwhile, I'm the one who brings cranberry bread to Thanksgiving, gets stuck peeling potatoes, and sits quietly as Vanessa recounts courtroom victories to a rapt audience. But what no one knew, what I never offered up, was that behind my modest apartment, my worn cardigans, and my second-hand Toyota, I had built something they couldn't even fathom. A quiet fortune, piece by piece, find by find. $15 million, hidden in plain sight. It all came undone last Thanksgiving, the moment Vanessa borrowed my phone in the kitchen, saw a single unread message from my financial advisor congratulating me on surpassing the $15 million mark that quarter. Her face changed as she read it, confusion giving way to shock, then something worse, entitlement. But before I tell you how it all exploded, you need to understand where this began. I grew up in a classic colonial house in suburban Massachusetts with white shutters, a manicured lawn, and expectations carved in stone. My father, Leonard, was a senior bank manager who wore cufflinks and read the Wall Street Journal at breakfast. My mother, Darlene, worked as a high school administrator and believed success came in degrees, job titles, and appearances. They weren't cruel, just calibrated to a definition of achievement that I never quite fit. Vanessa was the golden child, the embodiment of their dreams. She aced every test, won every award, married well, and had children who could recite Latin declensions by 2nd grade. Their fridge was a shrine to Vanessa's family, glossy photos and holiday cards that looked like they were pulled from lifestyle catalogs. My place on that fridge was always more symbolic. A magnet holding up a dentist appointment reminder, maybe a picture from 10 years ago, slightly crooked. I, on the other hand, found joy in dusty corners and forgotten history. As a child, I spent hours at the local historical society, tracing the edges of old letters, running my hands along worn wood and tarnished brass. I wasn't fascinated by success. I was fascinated by stories. I remember the curator there, Mrs. Hollister, taking me under her wing. "You have an eye," she said once, holding up a cracked porcelain teacup. "Some people see junk. You see the life it lived." That comment stayed with me. So when I chose to major in art history at a state university, my father barely acknowledged it. "Museums don't pay the mortgage," he muttered, eyes never leaving his paper. My mother offered a tight smile and asked if I'd considered teaching. After graduation, I worked for an auction house, absorbing everything I could about provenance, valuation, authentication. My pay was laughable, but my curiosity fed me more than any paycheck could. Eventually, at 25, I opened my own antique shop, tucked into a narrow brick storefront in Boston's historic district. I named it Easton Curiosities, refinished every creaky floorboard, polished every brass doorknob. My parents came to the opening, brought a bottle of wine, and left early after asking where the nearest Whole Foods was. Vanessa, she never showed up. "You're playing shop," she told me the next week. That's cute. Cute. The word that followed me for years. For nearly a decade, every holiday followed the same rhythm. Vanessa would hold court in the living room with her anecdotes about high-stakes depositions and ski trips in Aspen. I'd sit at the kitchen table with the kids, cutting apples for pie and answering shallow questions like, "Still running that little store of yours?" They never asked about the Civil War letters I'd uncovered or the 19th century watercolors I'd authenticated. They didn't know that a Tiffany lamp I found at a church rummage sale sold for $25,000, or that I once bought a dusty painting for $50 that later fetched $145,000 at a private auction in New York. They didn't ask, and I didn't tell. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew what would happen if I did. The moment they saw dollar signs, I'd stop being Camille and start being an opportunity. So I stayed silent. I invested wisely. I drove the same reliable car, wore simple clothes. I bought the building that housed my store through an LLC to avoid attention. My success grew quietly. I watched estate sales, studied probate filings, built relationships with elderly collectors. I could spot authentic Federalist brass hardware in a sea of reproductions. I could trace a 1780 desk's lineage through an ink stain and a maker's mark. Every dollar I earned came from a skill no one in my family ever took seriously. And so, last Thanksgiving, when I walked into my parents' home carrying homemade cranberry bread and 3 vintage children's books for my niece and nephew, I expected the usual dance smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, the polite dismissal of my life's work. Vanessa greeted me from the living room with a glass of wine and that same condescending smile. "Camille," she said, "still peddling heirlooms?" "Still collecting lawsuits?" I replied. A joke, sort of. We laughed, but the tension simmered under the surface like gravy on low heat. My father kissed me on the cheek. "Still keeping the lights on in that shop?" I nodded. "It's been a good year." He didn't ask for details. He never did. My mother handed me a peeler. "Help with the sweet potatoes?" It was always the sweet potatoes. I peeled in silence while Vanessa described the violin recital her daughter had crushed and the investment property she and Derek had just acquired. I smiled, nodded, diced. I'd heard this script before. Then came the moment that detonated everything. Vanessa's phone buzzed nonstop. My mother scolded her. "Put that thing down." "Battery's dying," Vanessa muttered. "Camille, can I use yours real quick? Just need to check an email about a merger thing." I hesitated. Too slow. She'd already grabbed it from the counter. "Password?" she asked. 0831, I said, already regretting it. The moment she opened it, I remembered the message from Martin, my advisor, still sitting on my lock screen. A congratulatory message. 15 million this quarter. Excellent growth. We'll discuss expansion options post-holiday. Her eyebrows lifted. Her smile vanished. "What the hell is this?" she asked. "Camille, is this a joke?" My mother stopped stirring. My father looked up. Vanessa turned the screen around, and there it was. Everything I had kept private, laid bare in digital ink. 15 million? She said, her voice rising. "Where did you get $15 million? The kitchen fell into a silence so thick even the oven timer dared not beep. I took a breath. "It's mine," I said. "I built it. Over the years. Quietly." "Are you laundering something?" she asked. "Are you in trouble?" "Of course not," I said. "I've just done well. Better than you assumed." My father stepped forward and read the message. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not just shock, but recalibration. "Is this real?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It's very real." Vanessa laughed, sharp and bitter. "So all these years you let us think you were broke? You let us pity you, and you sat on this? I never said I was broke, I said calmly. You all just never asked. And just like that, Thanksgiving was no longer about turkey and togetherness. It was about exposure. Accusation. The family dynamic I had navigated all my life had been upended in one moment by a banking notification and a borrowed phone. I had been unseen for so long I wasn't sure how to handle being suddenly and aggressively visible. And this was only the beginning. What they said next would make it clear they hadn't just discovered my success. They believed they were entitled to it. But in that moment, all I could think was how I had peeled every damn sweet potato for years, and still, I had never been truly seen. We gathered around the dining table not out of hunger, but because that's what Eastons did. Even in chaos, tradition had to be observed. My mother, ever the mistress of order, placed the turkey at the center of the table like a peace offering no one would accept. My father sat at one end, silent, his scotch now forgotten. Vanessa was opposite me, arms crossed, eyes sharp, a storm gathering just behind her, practiced composure. Derek, her husband, had the good sense to look uncomfortable, but he said nothing as his children quietly slipped away with their iPads. Camille, my mother said, forcing a smile that couldn't quite disguise the tension. Perhaps we could discuss this rationally. We're family, after all. I nodded. Rationally sounds good, but rationality left the room the moment Vanessa opened her mouth. You've been lying to us. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but fury. Sitting at this table every year, bringing homemade bread and hand-wrapped books, like you're some broke shopkeeper when you've been hoarding millions? I haven't been hoarding anything, I replied. I've been living my life, running my business, and keeping my finances private, like most adults do. 15 million isn't just private, Derek chimed in. That's legacy money. That changes things. My father nodded slowly. It does change things. You should have told us, Camille. We worried about you. Your mother and I even discussed setting aside funds in case you ever needed help. You don't say, I said, and there was an edge in my voice now. Because for years, no one offered help. What I got was constant advice to find a backup plan, get a teaching credential, or finally look for a real job. You could have spared us all the concern, my mother said gently. We just wanted you to be stable. I've been more than stable, I said. I've been successful. You just didn't want to see it because it didn't fit your image of what success should look like. Vanessa leaned forward, her tone suddenly softer, too soft, like a lawyer preparing to charm a jury. Look, Camille, this doesn't have to be adversarial. You've done incredibly well, and I'll admit I underestimated you. We all did. But now that we know, we can talk about how to move forward together, about how your success can benefit the family. I stared at her, stunned. Benefit the family? Of course, she said, as if it were obvious. Sophia's private school tuition is climbing every year. Max's dyslexia tutoring costs more than our mortgage. Derek and I are stretched thin. You don't have children, or a partner, or major expenses. Just think what a few million could do to help everyone. A few million, I repeated slowly. You make it sound like I'm sitting on a dragon hoard. Don't be dramatic, my mother cut in. Vanessa's simply suggesting what any loving family would do, share resources, support one another. Support? I asked. You mean the way you supported my career by calling it a hobby for a decade? The way you supported me by never asking about my shop, unless it was to question its viability? Vanessa bristled. That's not fair. We were concerned. We thought you were struggling. And when you thought I was struggling, did anyone offer to help then? I asked. Or did you just judge me from a distance while assuming superiority? That's not how we saw it, my father said. We just thought you were eccentric. You thought I was a disappointment, I said, and for the first time in years the words came without hesitation. You dressed it up in concern, but that's what it was. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, and filled with everything none of us had said in years. Vanessa finally broke it. You live in a walk-up above a shop. You wear second-hand sweaters. You drive the same beat-up car you had in college. It's not that we didn't respect you, it's that we thought you hadn't figured it out yet. And now that you know I've figured it out, you think I owe you something? It's not about owing, Derek said, his voice measured. It's about opportunity, family legacy. If you invested just $5 million into a diversified trust for the kids, no, I said. The answer is no. You're being selfish, Vanessa snapped. You don't have kids. You don't have a spouse. What are you hoarding this money for? To sit in a dusty shop for the rest of your life cataloging teacups and calling it purpose? My heart beat faster, but I didn't flinch. You think my life is less meaningful because I don't have what you have. But what I have is peace, integrity, a deep knowledge of history and objects that carry real stories. I've created a life that aligns with who I am, not who you wanted me to be. And I won't apologize for that. You're choosing money over family, my mother said, her voice trembling. No, I said, standing now. I'm choosing boundaries over manipulation. Camille, my father said, please sit down. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out, I said. You didn't value me when you thought I had nothing. You don't get to claim me now that you think I have everything. I walked out, past the untouched turkey, the carefully folded napkins, the decorative gourds my mother arranged every year with pride. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I just stepped into the cold, gray November afternoon and breathed. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of expectations lifting from my shoulders, not because I had escaped their disappointment, but because I no longer needed to fear it. My worth had never depended on their approval, and I would never let it be defined by their sudden interest. In that moment, alone on the front porch, I wasn't the forgotten daughter, or the eccentric antique dealer, or the family mystery. I was simply Camille, and for the first time, that was more than enough. I didn't sleep much that night. My body was still, but my mind raced, spinning through memories like a carousel I couldn't step off. The cranberry bread I'd baked sat untouched on my kitchen counter, its sweet scent a cruel reminder of the peace offering I had brought into a war zone. I kept thinking of the way Vanessa's voice cracked when she realized the money was real, the disbelief in my father's eyes, the soft tremble in my mother's tone as she said I was choosing money over blood. But what kept echoing loudest was that phrase, "The money is wasted on you." I sat on my old armchair, wrapped in a faded quilt passed down from my grandmother, staring at the flicker of the street lamp through my window, and asked myself the question I had never dared voice aloud. Would they have ever truly loved me if there was nothing to gain? The next morning, I opened the shop like always. The world outside hadn't changed, but I had. I moved through my morning ritual, deliberately sweeping the floorboards, turning the key in the old display cases, polishing the brass handles on the front door, grounding myself in these small acts of preservation. These pieces had weathered storms, wars, generations of neglect and rediscovery. So had I. The first customer of the day was a tourist couple from Maine, hunting for a vintage globe. They never suspected that the quiet woman behind the counter had just blown up her family tree. I smiled, offered a discount on a mid-century piece with beautiful patina, and wrapped it in recycled newspaper with the care of someone protecting a relic. After they left, I pulled out my old leather-bound ledger, the one I used to document finds and lessons learned. I titled the newest entry, After Thanksgiving. Underneath, I started 2 columns, what I had lost and what I had gained. I listed them honestly. Lost. Illusions of unconditional family support. A fragile peace maintained through silence. The belief that love alone could bridge years of condescension. Gained. Clarity, a sense of self-worth no longer tied to validation, the freedom to protect my story instead of performing it. That afternoon, I called Martin, my financial advisor. His voice was calm, neutral, just the tone I needed. "It happened," I said. "They know." "What do they want?" he asked, already anticipating. "A portion. $5 million was the casual suggestion. College tuition, therapy, investments, all noble-sounding purposes, but with entitlement underneath." He sighed. "Unfortunately, you're not the first client to have this conversation. We should tighten your privacy protocols, review estate planning, set clear boundaries." "Too late for secrecy," I said, "but I want to protect what matters now." We spent the next hour restructuring account access, double-layering security on all online systems, and adjusting my will. I didn't cut Vanessa's children out, but I added contingency support would be offered only if they pursued higher education or projects in the arts or historical preservation. Not punishment, but a line drawn in values. Later that week, I received a text from Amanda, my cousin in Seattle, heard about the drama. "You okay?" She had always kept her distance from Vanessa, had once told me that even family barbecues felt like networking events when Vanessa was around. I told her the truth. I was hurt, but not broken. She replied, "Good. They'll try to guilt you. Don't let them. You earned every penny." It felt like someone had slipped a hand through the fog and held mine for a moment. A few days later, as Boston dressed itself in garlands and lights for the holidays, I found myself staring into the window of a small community art center near Quincy Market. A sign caught my eye. "Winter Art Workshops for Youth. Scholarships needed." Without thinking, I walked inside. The woman at the desk, surprised by my quiet urgency, handed me a donation form. I filled it out and wrote a check for $50,000 anonymously. It was the same center where, as a child, I'd taken weekend classes in calligraphy and historical paper restoration. My parents hadn't seen the point back then, but Mrs. Hollister had. As I stepped back out into the cold, I realized this was the beginning of my new tradition. My own way of giving, not from guilt, not from pressure, but from purpose. At home, I wrapped a small stack of vintage books, children's editions of classic tales for Sophia and Max. Inside, I wrote, "The value of things isn't always visible at first glance. Love, Aunt Camille." I boxed them, sealed the package, and placed it by the door. Whether they reached the children's hands or were intercepted by their parents didn't matter. The act of sending them, of staying open in a world that had just tried to turn me into a vault, mattered more. Days passed. I didn't hear from my father. My mother sent a few hesitant texts, updates on neighbors, reminders about flu season, photos of the snow-covered backyard skating around any mention of Thanksgiving. Vanessa went silent, though she posted thinly veiled messages on social media about selfish people and how true family supports one another. I scrolled past them without engagement. I had no interest in public theater. The real drama had already played out in a dining room full of porcelain and pretense. I decided not to go to Christmas dinner. Instead, I invited my family of choice. Sophie, who owned the bakery next door and always saved me the imperfect pastries, Mr. Beaumont, the retired historian who taught me how to identify 18th century joinery techniques, Lily, my new part-time assistant and fellow antique lover, and Martin, who surprised me by bringing his teenage daughter. We ate roasted chicken and rosemary potatoes, drank mulled wine, and exchanged small, meaningful gifts. We spoke about books, history, art, the strange piece of snow falling outside warm windows. At one point, Mr. Beaumont clinked his glass and said, "You know, Camille, what you've built here is more than a business. It's a haven for things with forgotten value. And people, too, I think." I didn't reply. I just nodded and looked around the room, feeling a fullness that no inheritance, no family title, no external validation had ever provided. When everyone left, I sat alone beneath the soft glow of a Tiffany-style lamp and opened a letter I had written to myself months earlier during a rough patch. It read, "You are enough, even if they never say it, especially if they never say it." I folded it carefully, returned it to its envelope, and placed it between the pages of a book on early American women artists. They, too, had created in silence, been dismissed, been forgotten, until someone finally looked closer. I would be that someone for them, for others, and most importantly, for myself. Outside, the snow began to fall in gentle flurries, coating the cobblestones in silver. I stood by the window, watching the city hush under winter's quiet spell, and thought of the antique globe I had sold that week. The world was still turning, and I, finally, was facing it on my own terms. By spring, Boston thawed. The streets of the North End shed their icy sheen, brick by brick, until color returned to the city like a quiet promise. Tulips bloomed along the park near the harbor, and the chill in the air softened just enough to make me leave my scarf at home. I had changed, too, in ways that weren't always visible but were undeniable. The Camille who walked out of Thanksgiving dinner with her hands shaken and voice quivering was not the same woman who now stood behind the counter at Easton Curiosities, confidently explaining the history of a Federalist sideboard to a curious young couple. The shop had flourished after the holidays in a way I hadn't expected. Word had spread, not about the money I'd taken care to keep that quiet again, but about the atmosphere. People came not just to buy, but to learn. Lily, my assistant, had blossomed in the space, eager to take on projects and bring in a younger clientele through her workshops on textile conservation and Victorian fashion. Watching her felt like watching my younger self, but with better guidance. I gave her more than instructions. I gave her belief. It felt revolutionary. In February, I finally responded to the email my father had sent after Christmas. We met for coffee on a quiet Tuesday morning at a cafe tucked into a side street near Beacon Hill. He arrived early, as he always had, wearing his navy golf jacket and that look of hesitant pride that rarely reached his voice. The conversation was cautious, two people navigating across years of misread signals and mismatched expectations. He didn't apologize, not directly, but he admitted that he had never really understood what I was building. "I thought it was a phase," he said, looking into his black coffee. "Like when you collected stamps in third grade." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. And now? He looked up. Now I think I underestimated you, and maybe overestimated what success is supposed to look like. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he had ever come to one, and for the first time in my life, I didn't crave more. I thanked him for meeting me. We didn't talk about Vanessa. We didn't talk about the money, just about furniture, the Red Sox, and how fast time moved when you stopped pretending it didn't hurt. I never did return to the family's Sunday dinners. My mother continued to send gentle texts, weather reports, and neighborhood gossip, sometimes accompanied by childhood photos she'd scanned. Vanessa, true to form, went silent until mid-April when she sent a message through my mother that she and Derek were separating. "She's not handling it well," my mother wrote. "I thought you should know." My reaction surprised even me. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt something closer to sorrow, not for the marriage, but for the world Vanessa had worked so hard to build, only to discover its foundation was brittle. A week later, I mailed 2 packages, one for Sophia, one for Max. Each contained a book I'd chosen carefully, wrapped in soft linen ribbon, with a handwritten note inside. To Sophia, for the girl who plays violin. This story once belonged to a young composer in New York, 1912. May it remind you that greatness often begins quietly. To Max, for the boy who learns differently. These pages hold the thoughts of someone who saw the world a little sideways and made it more beautiful because of it. I didn't expect a reply, but 3 weeks later, I received a card with 2 short signatures in childish scrawl. It was more than I thought I'd get, and it was enough. In May, I launched something I'd dreamed about for years, but had always delayed a small scholarship fund for students pursuing preservation, historical restoration, or antique arts. I funded it through a new foundation named after Mrs. Hollister, the woman who first told me I had an eye. Applicants didn't need perfect grades or affluent backgrounds. They needed curiosity, passion. The first recipient was a young woman from western Massachusetts restoring Shaker furniture out of her grandfather's barn. When I called her with the news, she cried. Not because of the money, because someone believed in what she was doing. "They all told me it was a dead craft," she said. "They said it wasn't a real career." I almost laughed through my own tears. "So did mine," I told her. "Ignore them." Summer came. Tourists returned to the city, and with them, new energy. Easton Curiosities had become more than a shop. It was becoming a quiet hub for those who still believed in tangible history, in the value of things passed hand to hand. I began hosting evening talks, free, small, but intimate, about identifying true craftsmanship, spotting forged provenance, and the human stories behind every heirloom. One night, after a lecture on women silversmiths of the 18th century, a man approached me. "I brought my daughter," he said, gesturing to the girl beside him. "She wants to be a historian. I told her women don't do that kind of thing anymore. I was wrong. Thank you for showing her otherwise." I didn't know how to answer, so I simply said, "Thank you for bringing her." By autumn, 1 year had passed since the Thanksgiving explosion that changed everything. My mother asked if I would host this time. "Neutral ground," she offered. "Smaller gathering, just us." I said yes. Not because I believed everything had healed, but because I had healed enough to handle what hadn't. On Thanksgiving Day, my parents arrived just after noon. My mother brought her signature sweet potato casserole. My father brought a bottle of wine. They entered my apartment with less scrutiny than ever before. their eyes lingering longer on the window moldings and the 1860s portrait I had hung near the fireplace. "This is lovely," my mother said genuinely, not as performance. "The light in here is beautiful." "South-facing," I said, smiling. "Original glass, slightly warped, gives everything a shimmer." We sat. We ate. We avoided some topics, danced around others, but the undercurrent of comparison was gone. For once, I didn't feel like I was defending my life. I was simply living it. My father asked questions about a brass compass on the mantel. My mother complimented the rosemary biscuits. When they left, my mother hugged me longer than usual. My father said, "You've really built something." It wasn't thunderous praise, but it was real. I could live with real. That night I sat in my armchair again, quilt over my lap, the room dark, but for the soft glow of candlelight against wood grain. I picked up my ledger, the one where I had written "after Thanksgiving," and turned to the final page. At the top, I wrote, "1 year later." Underneath, I added just one line. "They saw the shop. I think they finally saw me, too." And beneath that, smaller still, but more importantly, I never stopped seeing myself. The worth of something, I had learned, is not in what others are willing to pay, but in what it means to those who understand its story. My story, my shop, my life, all of it, curated with intention, lived with quiet defiance. The world had once asked me why I loved old things. The answer had always been the same. Because someone once dismissed them. And someone else, someone like me, looked again and saw their worth. In the end, I had become the kind of person I spent my life searching for. And that was the most valuable thing I'd ever found.